Commanders, warlords, and farseers experience the horrors of battle across tens of thousands of war zones every single day in the Milky Way galaxy. Rage, fear, and glory drive the countless armies into a frenzy of destruction that has no end in sight. But across the long history of the 40K universe, there have been campaigns so brutal and so devastating that they eclipse all other battles. These massive campaigns of slaughter sometimes stretch entire sectors as bloodthirsty invading forces collide with heavily defended fortress worlds. The following are some of 40K's largest and most deadliest wars post-Horus Heresy, starting with the treacherous Badab War. This sector-wide conflict occurred in the Maelstrom Zone of the Segmentum Ultima. It was a struggle disguised as a civil war to protect the autonomy of the Space Marine chapters that made up the Maelstrom Warders from the greater Imperium of Man, but in fact was a war orchestrated by the ruinous powers of chaos that successfully manipulated the Maelstrom Warders into murdering their own Space Marine brethren and slaughtering the forces of the Imperium of Man. It began with the Astroclaw Space Marine chapter and their chapter master, Luft-Huron. Just like the rest of the Maelstrom Warders, the Astroclaws were charged with patrolling the area of space around the Maelstrom Zone, a vast warp rift second only to the Eye of Terror in size. Rebellions and cult uprisings were common, but stood no chance against the might of the Adeptus Astartes. And then came the failed coup attempt on the hive world of Badab Primaris in the Badab system, a revolt that would set in motion a series of events that would plunge the entire sector into chaos. Chapter Master Huron and his Marines were the liberators of the planet, but instead of returning power to a new planetary governor, Huron ordered the execution of the majority of the ruling class and took control of the planetary governor position, becoming known as the Tyrant of Badab, and naming the area around Badab Primaris as his fiefdom. While rare, this act was not unheard of for a Space Marine chapter. For example, the Ultramarines and their successors were all well known for taking direct authority of a planet. But Huron took it a step further and continually petitioned the High Lords of Terra for reinforcements in order to fully pacify the Maelstrom Zone. In the Chapter Master's eyes, he wanted to raise a combined Space Marine force that would rival the size of the Adeptus Astartes legions of the Great Crusade, and he would lead them into battle. This went completely against the Codex Astartes laid out by the Primarch Guilliman and agreed upon by the Loyalist Primarchs after the Horus Heresy. They knew a force this big would lead to another civil war. The High Lords of Terra denied the Tyrant his request, and in protest, Huron denied the Imperium planetary ties, gene seed ties, and blocked trade routes throughout his realm. When an Imperial investigation fleet was destroyed, and 20,000 innocent Imperial lives were killed by the revolting Astroclaws, the Imperium realized that they had a bigger problem on their hands. It became clear that not only were the Astroclaws disobeying tithe requests, but also other Maelstrom Warders chapters stood in defiance with the Tyrant. The High Lords called for an arrest and a trial of Huron, but by that point he had amassed so much power that the request was ignored, and the Tyrant issued the infamous Article of Just Secession, which sparked a schism between the Imperium and the Maelstrom Warders. It's important to note that many of the chapters that sided with the Tyrant were unaware of the heretical actions of the Astroclaws. They were tricked into the conflict by Huron, as he painted the High Lords as aggressors and a threat to the autonomy of the Space Marines. Nevertheless, this action created a renegade Space Marine empire, and the secessionist hubris would feel the wrath of the Emperor's might. The Imperial forces tasked with ending this schism was comprised of dozens of Space Marine chapters, a substantial inquisitorial force, Battlefleet Carthago and Solar, and dozens of Astra Militarum regiments. The secessionists seemed to have a much smaller force, with most of the Maelstrom Warders chapter and the traitorous Battlefleet Maelstrom, but it was revealed that the Tyrant had absorbed a long-thought-lost chapter, the Tiger Claws, and had been experimenting with the Space Marine gene seed, thus significantly bolstering their ranks. With a larger force than originally prepared for, the Imperium was caught off guard, and the Badab War became a horrible tangle of death, where Space Marine chapters slaughtered each other. To make matters worse, most of the secessionist chapters were Loyalist Astartes, fighting under false pretense created by the Tyrant. This act of heresy went against everything the Emperor and the Primarchs had laid out for the Adeptus Astartes, and it revealed Huron's corruption by the forces of chaos, who successfully used him not only to cause sector-wide conflict, but also corrupt many of the other secessionist forces. Eventually, the Imperial forces destroyed the Astroclaw stronghold of Badab Primaris, killing 5 billion as a result, while millions of civilians across the sector died because of the conflict. Only 200 surviving Astroclaws, now Chaos Space Marines calling themselves the Red Corsairs, escaped into the Maelstrom Zone, led by the now elevated Chaos Lord, Huron Blackheart. The Loyalist Space Marine chapters that were secessionists eventually realized the deception of Chaos and were sent on a 100-year-long penitent crusade to atone for their sins against the Imperium and the Emperor. Thousands of Loyalist Space Marines and millions of Imperial Guardsmen lost their lives while fighting with the secessionists. The Badab War became a horrible war that caused Battle Brothers to murder each other in a relentless and unnecessary struggle for a region of space already teeming with chaos. Even with Imperial victory, humanity came out losing. Another one of the galaxy's largest battles was the first conflict between the Imperium of Man and the Tau Empire. Known as the Damocles Gulf Crusade, the sector-scale war was initiated by the Imperium as a way to send a message to the Tau Empire that humanity reigned supreme over the galaxy. Despite attempts to negotiate by the Tau Water and Ethereal Caste, the Imperial forces bulldozed through the eastern fringe of the galaxy until they arrived into Tau-controlled space. The first sign of the invasion upon the Tau Empire came from the scanners of Pryan, the outpost planet of the Dalith Sept. After picking up unusual readings, the Tau switched to long-range optics and were shocked to see great rent openings in space, with the massive Imperial battleships and their supporting craft emerging out of nowhere. Although the Tau fleet and the Pryan's well-armed orbital station took a toll upon the Imperial Navy, the way was soon cleared for the Crusade to advance toward Dalith Prime. In the largest conflict of the war, Imperial forces landed upon Dalith Prime. In this case, they were not taking on a recently converted Imperial world or a newly founded colony, but instead were treading upon a heavily populated Tau Sept world. The Imperial drop was contested by swarms of atmospheric fighters, but was eventually successful in establishing a beachhead. Soon the Imperium's ground forces, with Titans and armored formations as the spearhead, plowed relentlessly toward the cities of Gelbrin. The Imperial advance was stalled by storms of missiles raining down from beyond the hills. When units were detached to drive back the Tau spotters, they were instead engaged by jump troops protected by cloaking fields. Each time Imperial forces attempted to regain momentum, they were met by the timely counterattacks of the Fire Caste. These thrusts were orchestrated with precision and deadly effect by Commander Farsight and Shadowsun, two heroes of the Tau Empire, who would solidify their burgeoning reputation by masterminding the defense of Dalith Prime. Night was the worst for the invading forces, as under the cover of darkness, Tau, in advanced battlesuits, made swift, hard-hitting strikes. With the Tau's superior optic technology, major losses were inflicted upon the Imperial armor, while little damage was suffered in return. Mankind's elite Space Marines attempted to land behind the Tau's line and regain the initiative, but they were defeated by teams of heavy battlesuits whose formidable firepower quickly downed their transports. With more Tau reinforcement arriving at the front, the Imperial fleet's ability to hold orbit became tenuous. The Imperium's momentum was spent. They were finally forced to withdraw, leaving much of their equipment behind. It is conceivable that the Tau could have encircled the Crusaders, but at the Ethereal's insistence, the Water Caste opened a dialogue and agreed to a truce, allowing the invaders an unimpeded retreat. The Damocles Gulf Crusade would see the death of millions of Tau civilians and warriors, as well as hundreds of thousands of Imperial attackers. This bloody war of conquest would have seen worse if it wasn't stalled by the arrival of High Fleet Behemoth. And then there's the Octarius War, a savage and never-ending battle between the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan and the Orc Empire of Octarius. This war is unique in that it wasn't initiated by the two warring factions, but instead by the Imperium of Man. The conflict began when Inquisitor Cryptment of the Ordo Xenos was given a live Genestealer brood, the Tyranid bioorganism that is responsible for calling in the High Fleet. When presented with this biological treasure, Cryptman used the brood of captured Genestealers and engineered a Tyranid invasion within the Orc-Helm Octarius system, very close to the Leviathan's line of advance. The crowded Orc cities of Octarius, so teeming with life, soon drew the entirety of High Fleet Leviathan into the tight cluster of Orc-held star systems. Cryptman's plan seemingly worked, for Leviathan was diverted from its course to Terra, and both Orcs and Tyranids were now thoroughly occupied with destroying each other, initiating the conflict known as the Octarius War. At first, the Orcs of the Octarius Empire were more than thrilled at the arrival of High Fleet Leviathan. The acting overfiend of Octarius, a Deathskull war boss by the name Zog Steeltooth covered himself in blue paint and enjoyed the chitin armor he was looting from the giant bugs. The war raged across the whole sector, its epicenter squarely targeted upon the planet of Octaria, the central world for all the greenskin territory. The entire mega-continent of Octaria was a battlefield into which both sides poured their might. As the war progressed, the Tyranids began to realize a steady stream of combatants charging at the Orcs' front line was simply fueling their ranks. The Orcs' population grew larger and mightier with every wave of bioforms thrown at them, and suddenly, the Hive Fleet changed tactics, sending a smaller wave of specialist Tyranid bioforms and quickly withdrawing them when the damage was dealt. This infuriated the Orcs. To them, this hit-and-run tactic denied the greenskins of a proper fight. Even though the Overfiend's Orcs had grown big and strong on their diet of constant war, they had now met their match. The ever-evolving spawn of the Hive Fleet Leviathan were gaining the upper hand, showering the planet with reinforcements, sending yet further broods of elite teams to chip away at the Orc horde. Across Octaria, the Orcs were forced to take refuge in scrap iron fortifications. It seemed only a matter of time before the Tyranids collapsed each of the ramshackle fortresses. With the greenskins' impending doom close at hand, Gork and Mork blessed the Orcs of the Octarius Empire by sending the Prophet of the Wa, Gatskul Magorok Thraka. Wa Gatskul descended upon the spore-ridden skies to rally his fellow greenskins. At first, the Overfiend's Orcs thought the rocks blazing through the atmosphere were some kind of new foe. All across Octaria, they landed, smashing gaping holes through the gargoyle-filled skies, and plowing into the scuttling hordes on the ground. It was not slime-covered, chitin-plated Tyranid creatures that emerged from the asteroids, but more Orcs. They surged outward, taking the fight to the Tyranids, while the rocks themselves opened up with heavy-caliber ordnance. Behind their shabby defenses, the greenskins let loose volleys of cheers and hails of supporting fire of their own. Zap guns, mega cannons, and bubble chuckas brought terrible destruction among the Tyranid advance. But the Tyranid response was frighteningly quick. Large swarmed creatures, hulking scythe-limbed horrors, and gargantuan-sized beasts lumbered to oppose their new greenskin threat from the sky. The chants of the Orcs of Octaria died in their throats, for they knew that these towering behemoths had been held and reserved, saved for the final death strike. When the Orc defenses had been breached, these monsters would have arrived. Now the newcomers would be shredded, for there could be no hope for infantry out in the open. To their surprise, the air flashed as teleporters began to bring in more reinforcements. All across Octaria, the cratered rock landing sites now blazed with unnatural lights. After each flash, more and more mobs appeared, and these were not just infantry. Arriving with guns, gargantuans and stampas concentrated their firepower on their largest foes, while at their feet, Burnaboy mobs spread out. With each blast from their weapons, they sent blossoms of red fire leaping out to flash-dry the lesser creatures in droves. Amidst the mobs pouring forth, countless crude banners and totems could be seen, carried high above the newly arrived troops or mounted atop clanging battle wagons. The Orcs of Octaria saw the symbols, and they knew who had arrived. At Gargates, the Overfiend's shanty capital, Thraka himself appeared via teleporter. He held the charge at the head of his bullboys as they crashed through the serpentine raveners that were beginning to undermine the first line of defense. To the greenskins that watched, this massive Orc warlord in mega armor fought like Gork himself. He wove in and out of sight in a swirling carnage, but he was easy to pick out. An aura of green brutality seemed to surround him as he clobbered each of his foes so hard that limbs, heads, and claws flew in bloody arcs all around him. He moved like some elemental destructive force, a one-orc wave of destruction. His custom shooter spat death with every swipe. Gatskull's power claw sliced multiple foes in half. Every motion from his elbow backswing to the stump of his iron feet cracked the shell-like armor of the Tyranids and sent more to fall, thrashing their death throes on the blood-strewn ground. And then the unbelievable happened. The body-strewn landscape of Gatskull's feet seemed to buckle and bulge upward. Then Gatskull was gone. A Moloch had come. It burst from below, and as its bulk breached the surface, the creature coiled about itself like some hideous constricted serpent. This was the largest of such creature any of the assembled Orcs had seen. The deadliest spawn of its kind that had ever slithered underground or was seen by the light of any sun. The triumphal scream that burst from the beast's gaping maw twisted metal and made orcs miles away fall and cover their ears. Even before its screech of victory was over, something had gone wrong. The Moloch heaved, flopping its mass so that it seemed that the world itself trembled. Then the beast quivered, withering in convulsions, twisting its mighty coils in arcing loops. An unnatural bulge formed from its midsection, and now thrusted a power claw amidst gore and slime-covered entrails. Shoot-a-blast widened the hole, and out stepped Godskull Magorok Thraka, striding out the very belly of the beast. The mightiest of the orc warlords roared his victory to the skies, a rallying cry to the greenskins, and a challenge to all that lived. After that, nothing could stop the orcs. Chanting their warlord's name, the greenskins of Godskull went on a kill rampage, hacking, shooting, and slaying in a berserker frenzy. From behind the scrap iron walls, the orcs of Octaria burst forth to join in. Even Zog Steeltooth, the overfiend of Octarius, was chanting the name Godskull as he gunned down the living walls of Tyranids that attempted to stay the greenskin onslaught. A great butchery began, and it would not stop until Octaria was free of the creatures of Leviathan. When reports of Godskull's arrival came back to the Imperium, Inquisitor Critman's plan quickly came under scrutiny. It was then that they realized that both Xeno races thrived on war, and whichever army won, the Imperium would have a much bigger threat than before. They calculated that if the Tyranids win, they will have assimilated vast quantities of strong, aggressive orcoid DNA, and more than likely incorporated into their own bioconstructs, creating incredibly resilient and battle-hardened subspecies. Worlds on the edge of the conflict had already begun to foul with the Imperial Segmentum Command. Pictures captured of Tyranid assault organisms that were larger and more formidable than ever before. Now if the orcs win, the Imperium would have to face an orc wall, larger than any greenskin force encountered in modern time, larger still than both Armageddon assaults combined. There is no possible way to know which side is going to win, and the death toll is so insurmountable that even with the disappearance of Godskull, the Octarius War has no end in sight. Now, of course, there are countless other campaigns and battles throughout the history of the 40k universe. This is just my very short list. This was Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom